Freemasonry was a radical expression that came out of the Reformation. It was radically ecumenical. It believed in certain civic ideals that later got framed into the Constitution. It was far from the only source that the framers were operating off of when it came to religious freedom and things like that. But it was a source. It was a source. And when Manly was writing about this material, that thesis, it might have been acknowledged, but it wasn't widely recognized within most works of American history. And again, in more recent decades, the influence of Masonry as a civic and political force is more validly recognized. When Manly was writing about that, it was a little bit more of a point of view that was off to the margins. Now, flash forward to the modern Middle East and other parts of the world, there's all these sinister ideas about new world orders and deep states and the Illuminati and Freemasons and so forth. And so if you're going to have a handful of books on your bookshelf that take that conspiratorial point of view, you might have a copy of The Secret Teachings, which doesn't take a conspiratorial point of view at all. It just simply tries to map out the fact that there were these connections, but the end user doesn't always understand that. The end user may think, oh, this is some sort of, secret code about, the hidden sinister forces behind the founding of the United States. So these books can be very easily misunderstood. They can travel strange and serpentine paths, and if this list is accurate, then it found its way onto this man's bookshelf. I wouldn't ascribe too much. It's not a sort of momentous find in the sense that there are a lot of misunderstandings of American history, and a lot of people who gravitate towards books either without reading them or without really grasping them.
Yeah, and I think even if he did read it, it would be an esoteric version of Islam that I don't know that he'd even recognize.
I don't think he'd recognize it at all. And a lot of people have books in their bookshelves that they don't read. So let's all keep that in mind,
Fair enough. Well, this gives me the opportunity to say that we are working with the documentary filmmaker to create a film of Manly P. Hall and his work. And unlike the Sahagan book, which is a Hollywood biography, this is going to be about Manly's life and work, contextualized here in Los Angeles, and looking forward to that very much. So we can wait for that to come out. It should be amazing. We've got a lot of other great things going on here that you'll be seeing in the coming months and years. But for now, Mitch, let's talk about the Seeker's Guide. Now, this is not an exhaustive line-by-line commentary of the Secret Teachings. It would be like the rabbis use, like
right
forever. What is this book?
Well, it is. I liked your earlier description of it. If I'm remembering it right, it's a kind of lobby to the Secret Teachings of all ages, and it's a 12-chapter book that examines the backstory of the Secret Teachings, who Manly Hall was, what we can understand about his intellectual process, how we can understand his ability at such a young age to created this magisterial volume. And then I go through a variety of subject areas that Manly covers in the book, and I try to help readers understand some of the historical background of these areas, some of the developments that have come to light since Manly wrote the book, or since Manly's death. For example, we were talking earlier about the archaeological developments 10 years after Manly's death that validated his description of the Oracle at Delphi. Manly was very interested in the question of lost civilizations, or a thesis about Atlantis. And the fact is, in the time since Manly wrote the book, we do have some theories that have arisen from independent Egyptologists like John Anthony West and Robert M. Schock, a geologist at BU, that there's water damage on the oldest portion of the Great Sphinx at Giza, and that should be examined as to whether it could reset the timeline of ancient Egypt. Manly maintained that the timeline of ancient Egypt extends back to 10,000 BC versus, roughly 3,500 BC, which is kind of the long-standing traditional inception point of what we consider ancient Egypt. And in fact, the Shock West thesis holds the same thing that Manley did, that the timeline should be reset to 7,500 or as old as 10,000. This is very controversial, and this is not accepted within mainstream Egyptology, to put it mildly. But I do believe it deserves a hearing. And so I write about that, for example, in connection with the secret teachings. I try to bring some light to some of Manley's subject matter, including mystical Christianity, the nature of Kabbalah, the history of the tarot cards, and in particular, the so-called secret society thesis. What role did Freemasonry and other esoteric thought movements play in the founding of America? And there's real history there. There's real historicism that can be brought to bear on those questions. Yeah. And so I try to create a network of 12 chapters that provide the background to the book, that provide background to some of Manley's most significant subjects, and that also provide the reader with pertinent scholarship, ideas, and developments that have occurred since the book was published, which is now almost a century ago. So obviously there are going to be some developments, or that have occurred since Manley's death in 1990. And there are many subjects that I don't cover. Those that I do cover, I view as kind of the foundational subjects of the secret teachings, the subjects that sort of make up the grid work on which most of the chapters stand. So my hope is that it serves as it's a companion to the book, essentially. It's a companion to the book that provides a backstory about Manley, a backstory about his subjects, and updates on some of his most foundational subjects.
Yeah, right. And this is what I've always appreciated about you is you ground things. I don't care what it is, if it's UFOs or Satan or tarot or the Hermetic philosophy, you ground it. And I find that so important in esoteric studies.
Thank you.
It's so easy to fly off,
Absolutely. There's so much that's speculative out there. And, we as the generation immersed in digital culture have so much information available to us, it's almost confounding. But the fact is, life is not just about quantity, and insight doesn't just arrive in quantity. We have to be able to frame things